Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and a certified informational privacy professional, and I help provide practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hello, Justin Daniels here. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I do that through identifying the problem and helping to come up with a practical solution. I am a cybersecurity subject matter expert and business attorney.
And this episode is brought to you by Red Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, SaaS, e-commerce, media agencies, professional and financial services. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there is greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more, visit redcloveradvisors.com.
And today we're going to be talking about Jody's favorite subject.
Drones. Yay!
So we have here with us an entrepreneur. Pramod Raheja is the CEO and co-founder of Airgility. Airgility is dedicated to making a big social impact by creating unparalleled aerial unmanned systems that can fly anywhere, including areas where there is limited or no GPS access and in confined areas. Their drones utilize artificial intelligence and machine learning so they can perceive their surrounding, which enables them to map areas, track objects, and provide analytical feedback in real time. Pramod, good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me today. And you did a great job with that description, by the way. I couldn't have done it any better.
There's no drone outside that I'm not aware of that's videoing our discussion.
Well, you're going to take all your fun knowledge here, aren't you? And going to go play with the drone this afternoon.
Indeed.
All right. Well, Pramod, we'd love to hear a little bit more about you. How did you get started and how did you find your way to a company focused on drones?
Yeah, sure. So how I got started story's a bit long, but I will give you tidbits that will form the complete picture, which is to say that when I was a young kid, as long as I can remember, I had anything that flew on my walls in my room. So while I'm dating myself here, other teenagers might have had pictures of, what was that model's name? Farrah Fawcett or Christy Brinkley. I had pictures of spaceships and airplanes. And so been a lifelong aerospace engineer and aviator as well. I'm also a manned pilot and have many hours flying manned aircraft. And flew a little bit of remote control airplanes as a kid and rocketry and all those kind of things that are really fun that led me to this sort of domain. However, I deviated from that domain for many years doing entrepreneurship and mostly B2B service software type businesses. So I've been a serial entrepreneur for quite a long time, for probably 25 years now. And about 4 years ago now, met my co-founder who was a professor at the University of Maryland, building drones, basically. He was coming up with all kinds of cool ideas and intellectual property that was very unique. I was introduced to him to be a co-founder. It was actually a date. It was, we were matched and we dated for a while, and then we decided to start Airgility. And here we are almost 4 years later, doing some of the things that Justin described at the beginning here, as he described, so nicely described what we do.
I know you're going to get all into that, but I think there could be almost a whole nother company concept here of the matchmaker for, ideas and co-founders. That's fun. You could have like a whole dating like circuit for businesses.
Indeed. With artificial intelligence that'll have an algorithm to tell you exactly who that person should be.
That's a good idea.
I think it could be a dating app. The hell with the drones and the AI. So speaking of artificial intelligence, let's talk a little bit about the company that you have now, Airgility, and how you are combining artificial intelligence with the use of drones.
Sure. So as you described earlier, we have really unique drones, which by themselves are quite unique, and we have a growing patent portfolio on our designs and the actual claims that go around those designs and what they can do and what they can't do. However, you add in what we call AI layers, as you described as well, and that includes collision avoidance and sense and avoid capability. What that means is that I could train you to fly the drone in about 10 seconds. I could say, do this, this, and this, and you would be flying in complex environments without fear of crashing the drone, which is, of course, everybody's fear, because they're like, well, I don't want to fly it. I don't want to crash it. And then you add in also the event layer, the detection layer, which includes anomalies, events, people, facial. And now you have a machine that is mobile, that can move around in 3D space, but also is able to have a brain on board. We call it intelligence by Airgility, where we're putting brains onto drones. And the way we do this is we have our own secret sauce of sensor and algorithm fusion that allows us to do these calculations in such a way that we're minimizing the amount of power being used. Because one of the biggest challenges with flying a drone or any kind of robot is you're using batteries to power it typically. And just like our brains, if they have to think too much, they run out of power fast and they want to take a nap. And so we've figured out how to optimize their brains with these sensors and algorithms working together in concert to only really work on the most important things only when needed. Well,
what are some of the use cases for this type of technology? What types of companies are utilizing this? We'd love to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, so the use cases are just growing exponentially every day. Really, at the most basic level, people will think of a drone as taking a picture of a house. So real estate applications, for example. But that's just the most basic level. You can get much deeper than that. So insurance companies are using it. For example, when there's an accident at a intersection, say two cars collide and there's an accident, a drone can fly around that accident and take a complete 3D scan of the whole thing that helps the investigators, both on the insurance side and on the public safety side, figure out what happened, and they can do it. It can do it very quickly. And then inspections. Think about cell towers and bridges. Bridges around the world are decaying, regularly, and they need to be inspected and fixed. And just about, I think it was 4 years ago, you can Google this, and there was I'm sure if you just Google Italian bridge that collapsed, you will find this big, huge bridge in Italy that just literally fell apart. And, just like you see in the movies. And so that's a problem. And so utility projects, construction activities, infrastructure, nuclear power plants, you name it. There is a thing to do. Power lines, oil and gas industry always has inspections. And by the way, most of the time, the way that they're doing these inspections these days is with humans. They're actually going into dangerous places. They're going into tanks and things like that, and actually visually inspecting or taking pictures or video. Why do that and put yourself in risk when the drone can do that? On the public safety side, we are participating in search and rescue and security applications. So think about a drone maybe that approaches, or it could be a ground robot, or it could be a drone. In most cases, it's going to be a drone because you don't know where something's going to happen, right? So let's say there is an active shooter situation or a suspect. What do they have in their hand? Do they have a gun? Do they have a cell phone? Do they have a knife? And that's important information to know, and how the first responders are going to approach the situation and actually handle it. Just a few days ago, I think somebody was shot because the officer thought they had a gun in their hand, and in fact, it was a cell phone. If you had some sort of AI that approached that scene prior to the first responders showing up, which is the idea, they can give them some intelligence, some situational awareness to say, okay, here's what's going on. And I can give you many other real life examples of that sort of thing.
I have a question. I can see you're so excited, but I have a question. I'm taking my question.
I'm stymied.
Yes, you are. So a couple things actually come to mind when you were talking about that. One of them being kind of in that particular example, it's a moment where there's not a lot of time to sort of wait, find a drone, get it, fly it over. How are people utilizing this in a bit of real time is kind of the first question. And then the second is many of the examples you shared are outside, which make a lot of sense. Are you seeing the use of these inside as well? I mean, Justin thoroughly enjoys taking pictures of our house and us and our dog. So completely understood all of the outside ones. I would love to hear about some examples other than residential real estate picture taking, which I have seen, for indoor use.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's what we do at Airgility is we focus on the indoor mission. Now we can fly outside, of course, too. So imagine flying from the outside through a window or a door into a situation where there's maybe an active shooter or you're trying to find something and it's a little bit dangerous. So you send in the drone first. That is one example. And there are many law enforcement agencies that would like to see that sort of capability really become more ubiquitous. On the idea of inspections, there are many tanks and things that hold whatever they hold, water, oil, other things that need to be inspected on a regular basis. And right now they're probably, I know they're done in a very rudimentary manner. They're not really, there's no scientific way of doing it. They're just literally visually inspecting it. So typically when you do that, you're looking for anomalies that meet a certain criteria or parameters, right? So you can program the artificial intelligence to look for those criteria or parameters and go inside into a tank, for example. As an example, we just flew inside a barn silo just as a flight test a few days ago, just to prove that we could, go in the dark conditions where there's no light. That's another thing that from a technology capability perspective, if you're flying into a dark situation, can the drone fly without light? Can it go into dark situations, or can it go from varying light conditions, from light to dark or dark to light? That's not as easy as you think. And we can do that. And so that's another example, a couple examples of the indoor mission.
Super cool.
So now I think we're going to talk a little bit about, drones and AI. How does that intersect with privacy and security? And so to frame this up, Pramod, to get your thoughts are, when you have a camera that has artificial intelligence and you put it into a drone, you are literally creating a data collection machine. And would love to get your thoughts and perspective as how you view privacy and security as coming into play as you grow this company. Because let's take, for example, you fly in to first respond. You may go over children. You may have artificial intelligence that may identify Jody in her car because she has a license plate, and the AI identifies the license plate, attributes it to Jody. So Pramod, as you are building this business and you are aware, generally about privacy and security, how does that factor into how you balance those two things versus building a business, getting more customers, being profitable?
Sure. So I think there's a lot to unpack there, first of all. And one thing I will add, and this is probably a bigger number now. The last numbers I saw was that the FAA estimated that by like 2023, there would be 800,000 plus drones operating in the United States, many for commercial purposes, such as the applications we just talked about: aerial inspection, utility, construction, real estate, etc. Well, the way drones work, just like your cell phone, you have software, which is also called firmware. So this is how your software works with that piece of hardware, that mobile phone or your cell phone, to run the applications on the drone. And then, yes, of course, the drone will now store the data and will communicate via wireless connection to ground stations in some form or fashion. All of those things are exploitable by hackers. Right. And so those are vulnerabilities where they could take over the drone, gain access to your system and network. So this becomes a very important consideration. And I think that those rules and things are still being worked out. And when I said there's a lot to unpack here, it's not just how do we protect the drone from somebody hacking, but what types of data should we be collecting? For example, if we talk about law enforcement, we've been part of a couple smart cities programs. And one of the things that we asked some of the police as we were going through these programs was, hey, from a privacy perspective, a citizen's going to have some concern over you watching them, aren't they? And the response from the police officer was, we don't have time for that. We're too busy trying to catch the bad guy or this or that. We don't have time for that. That doesn't answer the question, of course. So I do think that there's still a lot to be unpacked there on the defense or DoD side, or from a cyber perspective. The government is coming out with their own regulations and requirements, I should say. If you're going to build a drone and you're going to sell it to the government, it has to have certain requirements. So from our perspective, how we handle this is we work with top-notch firms that handle embedded software, that are embedded in a piece of hardware. And so we're addressing those things. The other thing that I'll add is that as you asked that very, very, broad question, which was a great question, but a lot there, is the ethics. And I sort of touched on that with the police just a second ago, but there's this term of, AI, ethical AI, like, okay, how do you use AI and what can you actually use it for? And that too is still one of those things that it's in its infancy and really, really, trying to be understood. And policymakers are right now, I would say, as we speak, trying to figure that out. So I've been on a few conferences and panels with, so-called experts that are talking about this, and really everybody's still trying to figure it out.
Pramod, any thoughts about, like, for example, our viewers may not know, but just the past week, the FAA went public and finalized its rule to start allowing drones to fly over people, over vehicles, and assemblies in, under certain circumstances, which is a huge opportunity for the industry. But then you also have remote ID. Would you care to share with our audience as a thought around remote ID?
Yeah, absolutely. So just like a manned aircraft. So when a manned aircraft gets certified by the FAA, it has to meet certain requirements. It has to have certain types of lights. It has to have certain types of communication mechanisms so that you know where the aircraft is at all times. And so that way, when you're flying around in airspace with other airplanes and other helicopters and things like that, that you're not going to hit each other. It's a very basic problem. Let's avoid collisions, right? So as you incorporate drones into the airspace system, and now they become integrated with manned aircraft, they have to meet certain requirements. They have to be able to file a flight plan, for example. All that means is if I'm going to drive from point A to point B, the drone is going to fly from point A to point B. It has to avoid sensitive areas. It's not going to be able to get near airports. It's not going to be able to go maybe above a certain altitude. And now as it's flying around at these altitudes and it has these flying around with other drones, you have to have the ability to identify, well, who owns that drone? Who are they flying for? Just like in the airlines, if it's an American Airlines flight or a United Airlines flight or a private flight or a helicopter from the police, who's flying at that given moment in time at that altitude and what they're doing and where they're going. And so it's the same thing with drones. And then you have safety mechanisms that are another piece of it, right? So you mentioned remote ID. That's one of them is to always know where something is and to be able to ID that drone and who owns it. And so it'll have some sort of identification number. And then it'll also have certain anti-collision lights that you can see, if you're flying your drone or you're flying a manned aircraft and you see something, you can see that it's there, and makes it more visible in the sky, whether it's day or night. So there's going to be a number of those things that I think over the next year, as operators will have a certain amount of time to basically implement these on their drones in order to be able to fly over people, as you mentioned. And then operators also will have to comply. And some of those will be safety mechanisms, such as a parachute system, for example, if the drone, falls out of the sky, which can happen, if you have a malfunction, right? The other thing that will come down the pike is maintenance requirements. I know that's not cyber and privacy, but, making sure that those drones are maintained just like a manned aircraft, or not just like, but analogous to that.
Actually, I do think that there's a connection. If you think about maintenance, you're going to have hardware and software. And
Sure.
A big part of maintaining the software is also going to help prevent any type of cyber threat actor, because we know that if this is just yet one more type of technology, that the threat actors will figure out how to come and hack a drone and interfere with whatever special activity it's intended to do. For sure. I had a question. You had mentioned around, the ethics and how companies need to determine what data they can and can't use. Can you share a little bit about a company who might come to you as a customer and maybe they're not as familiar with this, or they have these grand visions of, gosh, look at everything that I can do. Maybe what some of those requirements are from the FAA that you had shared, and or what they need to be thinking about, or kind of where's the balance of what your company needs to be considering versus what the customer needs to be considering? Almost like where's the responsibility line?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that that's again a large sort of one to unpack to some extent.
We like big questions around here. We did the softballs early.
Absolutely, and of course the answer is it depends, right? So if we're working with a federal agency, the requirements are going to be quite different than a private operator that maybe is doing something that doesn't really is not doing anything where they're taking people's information or data or seeing people. So I mentioned earlier facial recognition, right, for security settings. So one of the things we're focused on is security solutions. So what could that be in the private sector? It could be large construction sites, for example, where they're huge. There's acres of land where they need to make sure that they keep it secure. One real world application also that we're working on right now that we potentially might work on is securing a ginseng farm. So that sounds interesting and funny, but ginseng is something that takes 7 years to actually from the crop to get to where it needs to be mature enough to be harvested. And it's really a thing that that people will poach actually, and so we've talked to farmers that would love to have 24/7 eye in the sky around their perimeter, right? And so those are solutions we're working on. But that's a good question. Like, okay, in that case, more than likely the data is going to be owned by the client. It's their farm. That they're going to have access to that data and be able to do it with it what they please. However, at what point do you draw the line of, okay, somebody is trying to cross into my farm and I've taken a picture of them now and I have them and I can probably maybe match them in a database if I really want to and see who they are. At what point do you draw that line and say, I can do something with this or I can't? Right now, at the most basic level, you're going to take a picture maybe and send it over to law enforcement, and that might be the end of it. However, I think there's a list of questions there. What do you do? And can you keep that information and all those kind of questions that I think are still, some of them, are answered, and some of those are still being answered or will be answered as drones become more ubiquitous.
So Pramod and Jody, I'm going to throw out a question for the two of you along the lines of what we were discussing, which is, let's say Pramod's company is hired in a municipality setting where, like in the city of San Diego, they're going to fly a military grade drone way up above the sky, 20,000 feet up with AI in the camera, and they can take pictures of license plates and whatnot because that helps with traffic flow, because of course we're probably going to get back into gridlock here pretty soon.
Sorry to hear.
Thankfully or unthankfully. But it sets up my question, and that's this. What if you made the decision to say, hey, that's information, we're going to put it available to the public? And I find it interesting because how has Clearview AI become the force in the market with law enforcement? Because they did what?
I don't know.
They went and scraped faces and pictures off of publicly available sites on the internet. And now with drones, and if you have that kind of public safety implementation and you make that data available, where do you draw the line in terms of making that information publicly available and what can be done with it? Because Pramod, it really becomes like open source information for the threat actor. They use Facebook for that already.
Absolutely. That's true. And I will add, within our company, one of the reasons we went indoors is, if you think about this is now more of a business response to you. So, because some of the things that you've mentioned still don't have, 100% answers, right? If you think about the business perspective, there's something called blue ocean strategy. So when we started our company a few years ago, we were actually going down the path of first designing and implementing or wanting to have a solution around delivery and logistics. So what you just mentioned earlier about the FAA approving flight over people and all those kind of things that, still will take some time to develop. However, we decided to go indoors intentionally. Flying around in the GPS denied environment or GPS free, where you're not depending on GPS to operate your vehicle, is a very difficult problem to solve. We felt like we could solve it. We were working with DHS on this exact problem, and we were funded to help, to do that. And so we've developed a solution now. Well, the good news about that solution, from the kind of questions that we're talking about here, is that unless, especially when you talk about inspections and things like that, there's not a whole lot of data there that people care about, right? If I'm inspecting the wall of a tank, does that become an ethical problem? Probably not. Now, if I'm securing an indoor location, a large warehouse or something like that, and there's a drone flying around, there may be some other implications. Now, if I'm doing that in a private setting, maybe I'm working for Amazon in one of the big warehouses or something like that, it may not matter because that's a private company, and they own that information, and they have the rights to kind of see when you come and go, right? So in our case, we I'll just say we punted that question down the road a little bit. As drones become more ubiquitous and our solutions start to grow, it absolutely is something we are thinking about and figuring out.
But what's interesting about what you just said is that's where entrepreneurship and drones met, because you said, everybody's looking to use drones outside, but look at all these indoor applications, and better yet, the FAA doesn't regulate what goes on with drones inside. So you were saying this is a harder problem to solve, but it's one that has some really different parameters that could really help jumpstart the growth of your entrepreneurial opportunity.
Absolutely. And some of the things that our drone can do, either I haven't seen it, or only a handful of companies can do what we are doing indoors. So it's a much smaller subset. Of course, over time that will grow. And of course, there's competition. And of course, but the good news is, even with competition and sort of only a handful of companies, the validation's out there already. And so now it's just now it becomes kind of a marketing and sales exercise, and we got to get out there.
Well, you had asked me what I thought on the privacy side. I don't think there's a perfect solution, because when you're out in the public space, you, generally speaking, don't have the sense of privacy. However, there's this notion of what is considered publicly available information. And when you look at one of the laws, publicly available information is generally not, it was just randomly on the internet for anyone to find. Publicly available information is generally connected to a government, activity, something that's available in that sense. But a driver's license is also kind of another interesting one, because there's plenty of locations that sell the driver's license information. So what we thought was a government ID and government protected information, they're selling in a variety of different places. I think I don't have a good answer other than it's one that will continue to morph, and there'll be someone who will continue to misuse the data and will likely set a precedent of what will happen in the future. I do think, though, that the indoor use still has a similar situation, because imagine a stadium or some type of indoor event where you're collecting information that way. You're still, if you were to ever connect the dots, you could still have the same type of scenario, maybe just not as great.
Or what they'll do is, if I go to the sporting event, when I get my ticket online, because there really aren't tickets anymore, there'll probably be some boilerplate that says I'm going to consent to the use of my likeness, and there's going to be a drone there, and it just creates a whole bunch of interesting issues. My point was just to identify these issues, because I've seen in too many industries with social media and others, something has to blow up before people are like, oh, there's privacy and security. Yeah, ransomware is $1 trillion industry for a reason.
Right. No, I think it's a good point. And I do think that anyone who's looking to utilize a drone, indoors or outdoors, a big part of what we're trying to emphasize is that you have to consider the data that's being collected and used, and what would someone think if they knew what was happening? Would they say, well, I'm in the public and my license plate's public, so okay. Or I'm in a stadium and, everyone else is here, and somewhere I knew that they were going to take a picture of me and put me on the big video cam thing. So it's okay, it's in a drone. Or would they kind of do what I call the very fancy scratch your head test and question what is happening? With all that being said, Pramod, We've been chatting all day about privacy. So since you do have to consider privacy and security, and this is the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast, what is your best personal privacy tip?
Okay, that's good. That's good. My best privacy tip, and this might not have anything to do with drones.
That's okay.
I can certainly try to answer from that perspective too. I would say, don't share your birth date and your social security number out there unless you have to. Absolutely have to. That's my. It
surprises me how many places a doctor's office will still have the social security number on a paper form. And I know they're not using it because when I leave it blank, no one ever questions me. They barely even take the dopey paper form.
Wait a second. What about everyone on Facebook who gets the thing? Oh, it's Jane's birthday today and she's 34. That's
I will give you one other tip that maybe is even more stronger than don't share, because like you said, some of that stuff is available publicly or on Facebook. and that is I use a monitoring service. Anytime anybody tries to pull something on me, I get alerted, whether it's a public record or a credit, whatever, inquiry, whatever, that I get an email and then I can go and see who did that, So as every year when we do when the county does tax assessments, they'll do an inquiry, not a credit inquiry, but just you'll know that they're doing it, they're pulling your records. And so I would say that's even a stronger one because somebody's hopefully got your back there.
I was going to say, can you share which one you use?
Yeah, I use Identity Guard is what I use.
Okay. Thank you. We'll put that in the show notes so that people can check that out.
Okay.
And so now for the most important question is, when you're not droning, talking about AI, or hanging out with the kids who go to Virginia Tech.
Yeah. Okay.
What do you enjoy doing for fun?
Oh gosh, that's a big question too. I love everything outdoors, athletics. So I like hiking, biking, swimming.
Oh, look at you! You're two peas in a pod. Drones, Virginia Tech, and hiking.
Yeah.
Triple win.
In any sport, I can play any sport anytime. I love all sports: tennis, soccer, you name it. I do all of that when I can or when I have a chance to. So just pretty much any kind of game or outdoorsy type of thing. But I would say my favorite is kind of being out in the wilderness, outdoors, hiking and climbing and that sort of thing.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all this really fascinating information. If people would like to learn more about you and the company, where can they go?
Absolutely. I'm all over, publicly available. On LinkedIn, my first last name, Pramod Raheja, you'll find me. Twitter, that's my Twitter handle, Pramod Raheja, all one word. And you can check us out at www.airgility.co. And email me at pramod@airgility.co as well. So find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or message me directly.
Wonderful. Well, and we'll also include all of that in our show notes. So thank you again for being on the show. We appreciate it.
This was awesome.
I know. You're so happy.
I know.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.